Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into a case that has really left its mark on Des Moines for almost 50 years, the unsolved murder of Diane Schofield.
Yeah, it's a story that unfortunately ends before it really begins. Diane was only 21 when she was killed, and the mystery surrounding her death, it just continues to haunt those who knew her.
Yeah, it's especially poignant because both Diane's sister Twyla, who dedicated so much of her life to seeking justice, and Diane's daughter have since passed away. It just underscores the enduring impact of these unsolved crimes, how the pain and those unanswered questions, they can ripple through generations.
Yeah, the weight of that lost potential for both Diane and for her loved ones is truly heartbreaking. But let's start by getting to know Diane. Who was she before she became a headline?
Right. Well, the articles paint a picture of a young woman facing a lot of challenges. She was divorced, working as a waitress, and sometimes a masseuse to support herself. And she had even lost custody of her daughter at one point. It's a reminder that there's always a human story behind these cases, a life full of complexities that we often don't get to see.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating here is that those complexities might be directly tied to her death. The fact that robbery was ruled out early on, because Diane was still wearing a valuable wristwatch and rings when she was found, suggests a more personal, maybe even targeted motive. This wasn't just a random act of violence.
So instead of someone looking for quick cash, we're potentially dealing with someone who had a specific reason, a personal grudge, or maybe something even more sinister for wanting Diane dead.
Exactly. And that's where the details of the crime scene become even more chilling. The way her body was found, in the trunk of her own car, abandoned in a parking lot near the Des Moines airport, hands and feet bound, strangled with a cloth strip, speaks to a level of premeditation and control that's unsettling.
It's the kind of detail that makes you wonder about the killer's state of mind, their level of familiarity with Diane, and their motive. What kind of person would go to such lengths?
It's a question that's haunted investigators for decades. But before we get into the theories and potential suspects, let's rewind to those final days before Diane's body was discovered. She was last seen alive on July 7th, 1975, at a gas station, complaining about her taillights not working. Then she just vanished.
I can't imagine the agony her family and friends must have gone through during those missing days, clinging to hope while fearing the worst. And then, on July 10th, that hope was shattered when a parking lot sweeper made the grim discovery.
Yeah, that 3-day gap in the timeline is crucial. What was Diane doing during those missing hours? Could those unaccounted hours hold the key to understanding what happened to her? It's a question that has likely tormented investigators and Diane's loved ones for years.
It's like a missing piece of a puzzle, and without it, the full picture remains elusive. Did the police ever develop any strong leads about what might have happened during that time?
They did identify a key suspect, someone they interviewed extensively and even directly confronted, but despite their suspicions, they were never able to gather enough evidence to make an arrest.
That's incredibly frustrating. To know they had their eye on someone but couldn't build a strong enough case, what kind of obstacles did they face in the investigation? Was it lack of physical evidence, unreliable witnesses, or something else entirely?
Well, this was the 1970s, and forensic technology was nowhere near as advanced as it is today. DNA testing, for example, was in its infancy, and even fingerprint analysis wasn't as sophisticated. They did test the towels used to bind Diane, but it didn't lead to anything conclusive.
So without that irrefutable forensic link, it becomes a matter of building a circumstantial case, which can be incredibly difficult. Did they at least have a theory about why this suspect might have wanted Diane dead?
The sources are a bit vague on that point, which is part of what makes this case so intriguing. They suggest that Diane might have been involved in something risky, potentially related to her work.
Risky? What do you mean? We know she was a waitress and sometimes worked as a masseuse. Were either of those jobs somehow connected to illegal activities or dangerous people?
It's not explicitly stated, but there's an implication that her work as a masseuse might have brought her into contact with individuals involved in the criminal underworld. Maybe she knew something she shouldn't have, or perhaps she was caught up in something she didn't fully understand. Either way, it paints a picture of a young woman navigating a potentially dangerous world. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? This young woman working to make ends meet might have stumbled into a situation that ultimately cost her life.
Makes you wonder about the level of risk she might have been exposed to and whether she was even aware of the danger she was in. Do the sources give us any insight into the people she associated with or the kind of circles she moved in?
There are mentions of certain locations that were significant to the investigation, places where Diane might have crossed paths with people who could shed light on her final days. One of them is a tavern called Foosin' and Boozin', where Diane worked as a waitress.
Did something happen there? Was there some sort of altercation? Or was it just a place where she might have encountered someone connected to her murder?
Her boss at the tavern told police he last saw her on July 4th when she asked for some time off. But a friend of Diane's claimed to have seen her later that night at another night spot called So's Your Mother's.
Wait, so there's a discrepancy in the timeline that could be important. If Diane was at So's Your Mother's on the 4th, but her boss last saw her earlier that day, it means there's a chunk of time unaccounted for. Did the police ever investigate this discrepancy?
The sources don't go into detail about whether the police followed up on this lead, which is something I find intriguing. You'd think that any discrepancy in the timeline, especially during those crucial final days, would be a major red flag for investigators.
Absolutely. Even if it turned out to be nothing, you'd want to rule out any possibility that someone might be misremembering or intentionally misleading the police. It makes you wonder if there are other details like this that were overlooked or dismissed at the time.
Good point. Remember, this was almost 50 years ago. Investigative techniques, resources, even the societal context were vastly different. What might seem obvious to us now might not have been given the same weight back then.
That's true. It's easy to look back with the benefit of hindsight and question the decisions made at the time. But let's not forget the human element here. The investigators working on this case were dealing with limited information, pressure to solve the crime, and likely a deep sense of frustration at being unable to bring Diane's killer to justice.
And let's not forget the emotional toll this must have taken on Diane's family and friends, especially with the case remaining unsolved for so long. We already mentioned the tragic losses of Diane's sister Twyla and her daughter, both of whom passed away without seeing justice served. It adds another layer of sadness to this already heartbreaking story.
It makes you realize that the impact of these crimes extends far beyond the immediate victim. It creates a ripple effect of pain and unanswered questions that can linger for generations. It's inspiring, though, to hear about Twyla's dedication to keeping her sister's memory alive and pushing for answers. She even started a Facebook group called Justice for Diane Schofield, which is still active today.
That Facebook group is a testament to the enduring power of hope and the refusal to let Diane's case be forgotten. It's a space where people who knew her or who have been touched by her story can connect, share information, and keep the search for truth alive.
It also highlights the way technology can be used to bring attention to cold cases and potentially generate new leads. Even if someone didn't feel comfortable coming forward back in 1975, they might feel differently now, seeing that others are still fighting for justice for Diane.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, hope can persist. But let's circle back to the investigation. We know the police had a suspect, but they couldn't make an arrest. What was missing from their case?
Besides the lack of physical evidence, did they uncover any possible motive, or was that part of the mystery as well?
There are hints in the sources that suggest a possible motive, but it's shrouded in ambiguity. There's mention of Diane's ex-husband who was in prison at the time of her murder for an unspecified crime. Tragically, he reportedly took his own life after learning of her death.
That's a devastating detail. Did the police suspect any connection between his imprisonment and Diane's murder? Could someone have targeted her as a way to get to him, or was his absence a factor that made her more vulnerable?
The sources don't explicitly link her ex-husband to the crime, but it's certainly a line of inquiry that would have been explored. After all, in these kinds of cases, understanding the victim's relationships and the potential for revenge or retribution is paramount.
It adds another layer of complexity to an already tangled web of circumstances. So we have these tantalizing bits of information. A suspect who was never charged, a possible motive connected to Diane's ex-husband, and the suggestion that her work might have exposed her to dangerous individuals. It's like having pieces of a puzzle but not being able to fit them together.
And that's precisely what makes cold cases so compelling and so frustrating. There are always more questions than answers, more avenues to explore, more potential scenarios to consider. It's a constant exercise in piecing together fragments of information, hoping to find the missing link that will finally crack the case wide open.
But in this case, the clock is ticking. With key witnesses passing away and memories fading with time, the odds of solving Diane's murder seem to diminish with each passing year. Is there any hope that this case will ever be solved?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? While time can be an enemy in these cases, eroding evidence and making witnesses harder to locate, it can also be an ally.
How so?
Sometimes time can bring about a change in circumstances. Someone who was afraid to speak up back then might feel differently now, perhaps with a guilty conscience or a desire to clear their name. New technologies might emerge that allow investigators to re-examine old evidence with fresh eyes. Or maybe, just maybe, that one crucial piece of information, the missing link that connects all the dots, will surface unexpectedly.
A glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape. It's that hope, I think, that keeps people like Twyla fighting for justice, even when facing those seemingly insurmountable odds. The belief that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of eventually coming to light.
It's that persistence, that refusal to let go that can make all the difference in these cold cases. We see it in Twyla's tireless efforts, and we see it in the continued activity of the Justice for Diane Schofield Facebook group. A reminder that even though decades have passed, the search for truth and justice doesn't have an expiration date.
Yeah, what's striking about that Facebook group is the sense of community it fosters. People from all walks of life, some who knew Diane personally, others who were just touched by her story, come together to share memories, information, and theories. It's like a virtual gathering place for those who refuse to let her case fade into obscurity.
It is, and it's a powerful example of how social media can be used for good, giving a voice to the voiceless and keeping hope alive even in the face of unimaginable tragedy. Makes you wonder if someone out there, someone lurking in that Facebook group, might actually hold the key to unlocking this mystery. Perhaps they've been carrying a secret all these years, a piece of information they didn't realize was significant until now.
It's certainly a possibility. Sometimes, all it takes is a single detail, a seemingly insignificant memory triggered by a conversation or a photo, to crack a case wide open. Maybe someone remembers seeing Diane with a particular person during those missing hours. Or maybe they overheard a conversation that at the time seemed inconsequential, but now takes on a whole new meaning.
It's those seemingly insignificant details, the ones that might have been dismissed or overlooked back in 1975, that could be crucial to solving this case. And the fact that this Facebook group exists, that people are still actively engaged in discussing the case and sharing information, increases the chances that those crucial details will eventually surface.
It highlights the importance of keeping these cases in the public eye, continuing to talk about them and encouraging anyone with even the slightest bit of information to come forward. Even if it feels like a long shot, that one phone call, that one message could be the catalyst for a breakthrough.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that we all have a role to play in seeking justice, even for those we never knew. By sharing Diane's story, by keeping her memory alive, and encouraging anyone with information to contact the authorities, we contribute to the effort to bring her killer to justice and provide some measure of closure for those who loved her.
And that, I think, is the most important takeaway from this deep dive. Even in the face of tragedy, even when decades have passed and the trail has gone cold, hope persists. And as long as there are people who refuse to let go, who continue to search for answers and demand justice, there's always a chance that the truth will prevail.
Well said.
And to our listeners, if you have any information about the murder of Diane Schofield, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, please contact the Des Moines Police Department. You might hold the key to finally unlocking this mystery and bringing peace to those who've been waiting for answers for far too long.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of a cold case. While Diane's story is filled with sadness and unanswered questions, it's also a testament to the enduring power of hope and the unwavering pursuit of justice.